So now that we have some data in our spreadsheet, in our Google Sheet, we can go ahead and make a graph. What we want to first do is, again, make sure that the data we want on the x-axis is listed in the first column, and the data we want on the y-axis is listed in the second column. And again, I'm going to highlight this. So to do this, and I always use two fingers on a Chromebook, I'm going to use my left hand to click, and then I'm going to use my right hand to scroll and highlight this whole section. Okay, so once I have it highlighted, I'm going to come up here to Insert. And this seems a little strange because you know this is a chart, but there's lots of different types of charts. This is what this program calls them. And so it's going to make a graph, and it's going to take its best guess as to what type of graph we want. But in science, you generally don't want to connect the dots, and that's what this is. You want to see the dots. You want to see the individual data points, not a line that connects them all. So the first thing I'm going to do is in the setup, and that's usually what pops up automatically, is I'm going to change the type of the chart. And I'm going to make it one of these charts that have little dots on it. It's called a scatter plot. And again, it's as if I had created this graph and I had plotted all the points. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to do is to make sure that my graph looks basically the way I want it to look. It should have that position in centimeters over here on the y-axis, and then the time in seconds over here on the x-axis. If I mess this up and I switch the order of my axes, it's going to switch the order of the axes in the graph too. So I got to make sure that I made my chart correctly as I'm choosing this. All right, the next step I'm going to do is fix the title. Now, this is pretty much the title that science likes to use. We say something versus something. And the first something is always whatever's on the y-axis, and the second is whatever's on the x-axis. And so this is putting it in the right order, but we don't usually put the units in that title. So I'm going to just click right next to them. I double clicked in this box to get access, and now I'm able to change those. You can also do this under the Customize part of the editor, and you can choose to change the chart title or the different axes. But again, they're usually just set up for us automatically, and you just have to double click on something if you need to change, like if you spelled time wrong or something like that. All right, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to have the program do the math for us. So slope is usually very important in our class, and also sometimes the intercept. And normally we would have to do all of that by hand. But the real power of a spreadsheet is it can do this for you. Now, if you notice, I have clicked away from my graph, and I did that on purpose because you need to be able to see how to get that editor to come back up again. One way is that if you click once on your graph, you can touch these three dots and you can say, I want to edit the chart, and then the editor will come up. The other way you can do it is if you just double click on the chart, that will come up too. But you have to be careful when you double click, because sometimes you double click like on a line or on a point, and that can get a little messy. So the way that always works is the three dots and choose to edit. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to Customize again. And I'm going to come down here, and this is very important that you recognize where I'm at here. I'm going to go to this third spot where it says Series, and I'm going to open that up. And you can certainly play around with what the dots look like, what color they are, and so forth if you want. But this is the very important thing that we need to do in physics. We need to come down here where there's this checkbox, and we need to say we want a trend line. That is sometimes also called a best fit line. And what it does is it takes the best guess using a lot of mathematics behind it as to what represents all of this data. And you can see that some points are above and some points are below. That's normal because you can't really ever take perfect data. All right, we're almost done. The last thing we want to do is know what the equation of this line is. because that's going to be important to understand what this graph is really telling us. So I'm still in this same editing thing. I'm going to scroll it down a little bit more. And here where it says label, I'm going to choose use equation. And what that's going to do then is it's going to show me, it's not a perfectly formatted equation, but it is an equation that we will understand more about as we keep going. And again, if I just click off to the side somewhere, I can see my whole graph. If you don't like that this is covering up your data, you can click on the graph. Again, use your left hand to hold the graph and your right hand to slide it over. And you can see both your data and your graph then at the same time. By the way, once in a while, when you first create your graph, something weird happens in the setup where you don't end up with the time and the position or whatever the two things are that you're graphing. And so if you ever see that these don't make sense, this should be your x-axis up here and your y-axis down here. If that ever doesn't look right, then you need to play around a little bit with the settings or ask for some help.